So I'm going to talk on a slightly different plane, sort of avoiding all details. And it's more a kind of a helicopter view of some of the, what I think are quite important innovations, for better or for worse, in Chinese governments in the last 35 years. In about 5 minutes. And feel free to jump in with questions or whatever along the way, and I look forward to it back and forth afterwards. So, sorry about the blurry photo, but the Xi family doesn't usually hand them out in better quality than this. This is, in the middle in the foreground is the old man, Xi Zhongxun. So he is responsible for perhaps the single greatest innovation in Chinese governance when he was sent down to Guangdong. Oh, look, I take that back. He kind of has to vie, I guess, with Wan Li with the agricultural reforms around about the same time in Anhui and beforehand. But Xi Zhongxun opened up Guangdong. He arrived in, he was in jail in 77. By March in 78, he was down in Guangdong. Immediately sort of threw open the borders, stopped persecuting immigrants as they tried to flee across the border to Hong Kong, realised that there must be something going on, that Hong Kong must have worked out something that Guangdong and Beijing hadn't been getting right, set up without any authority or say-so from the top level, from Beijing. He sort of gave the villagers around Shenzhen the green light to do basically whatever they wanted. He had no go-ahead from Beijing, had no money from Beijing, so his model was essentially to build this little fishing village into something better based on smuggling revenue as people smuggled stuff across the border to Hong Kong and to Vietnam. And lo and behold, that's became the kind of the Guangdong model, the China model for opening into the world, a trade-based, capital-based globalization process, which well and truly has transformed not only China but also the world. So that's Xi Zhongxun, and you can see some of his children in the frame there, including one of them you've probably heard of. Up the top left is Xi Jinping, and next to him is I think that's Xi Yan'an, the younger sister. On the right there is Chi Chao. I heard whispers that she's pretty good at business, but Bloomberg tells me she's not only that, she's got about $1 billion of assets to her name. And on the right is Yuan Ping. He gets involved in a lot of business and various sort of charity/business operations around the place as well. Xi Xin is the great old lady still alive down the bottom left, and she, I'm told, is like the centre pole of the family, keeps it all together, keeps it all on track, if not all of it honest. And in the middle is, as I said, Xi Zhongxun. He passed away 10 years ago in 2002, and his legacy is not only being felt from the impact the success of Guangdong had on China and the world, but also there are a couple of other battles that came later that he was involved in as well. Innovation number 2. This guy in the middle is Hu Yaobang, and on his right you might recognise a rather more relaxed-looking Hu Jintao. And further to the right, equally more relaxed Wen Jiabao. So this is on a study tour, an inspection tour of Guizhou in 1986, possibly 87, and Hu Yaobang at this stage, he'd already picked out Hu Jintao as being a future Zhuxi, and he actually told my old man that in 86 he had to fly down to Guiyang to stay with Hu Jintao because Hu Yaobang told him that Hu Jintao was going to be the man. Now, in 86, so Hu Yaobang is perhaps the most extraordinary leader of the modern era in many ways. He, as well as being tirelessly working and scrupulously honest, he was also, some would say, politically naive. And so when Deng Xiaoping came up to him with a great idea in 1986 and said, "Look, what do you think, Hu Tongzhi? I'm thinking of retiring. I'm getting old. We've got to kind of get rid of this gerontocracy thing that we're sort of in danger of falling into." And Hu Yaobang, in all his naivety, said, "Great idea. That's a terrific idea. We can institutionalize age succession, and we can promote some merit up into the system, and that's the way to hold. It's great. Good on you." And then Deng went around the table, went further off and talked to Zhao Ziyang, and Zhao Ziyang said, no, Mr. Deng, we need you in power. China could not possibly go on without you. And around, he went around the elders, and Bo Yibo gave the same story. You could not possibly step down, Deng. I think Hu Yabang wants your job. Same from Chen Yun. And lo and behold, a few months later, and with the accumulation of some other issues, but I dare say this is possibly the most important, Hu Yabang sitting in what's called a Democratic Party Life meeting in January 1987, where for 5 days he's getting the absolute shit belted out of him by these elders for 5 days. He's getting, even though he's led the greatest opening, the greatest rise, from a standing start that any nation's ever seen, for 5 days he's told that he's sold out to the Japanese by inviting Japanese to China. He hasn't been loyal in his support for Deng Xiaoping. He's too relaxed about students, waving placards in various events, and he's not fit any longer to be the General Secretary of China. So in 1987 was this absolutely seismic rupture in Chinese politics. Up until then, you could say that China was on a path of economic liberalisation and political liberalisation. That went sideways. It wasn't over in 1987, but that was the first bomb blast under the political reform agenda. And there were only two guys that stood up for Xi Jinping. All these guys. For Hu Yabang. Hu Yabang had rehabilitated most of them, including Bo Yibo. Bo Yibo was the guy that chaired the session, purging him at the Party Life meeting. That's the thanks he got. But one other person he rehabilitated in particular was Xi Jinping, and he and Wan Li, who led the agricultural reforms, were the only guys who stood up for Hu Yabang in that 5-day horrible event. And both of them, in their own different ways, suggested that, not only should other people share Hu Yabang's mistakes, and perhaps he did get a couple of things right, but they gently, as best they could, questioned the legality of these old geriatrics sacking the guy that was supposed to be the number one leader of the Communist Party and the nation. Needless to say, not only was that the end of Hu Yabang's career, but Xi Jinping and Wan Li didn't have much to do with China's government after that. Now, neither of them got purged, but neither of them were any longer inside the tent. Xi Jinping, by 1990, he had pretty serious health issues. He was down in Shenzhen, and he never returned. He died in 2002. Wan Li, I think Wan Li might even be still kicking. Every now and again I see an amazing article in Yemhang Chunchou, the magazine. So that's the second. So Xi Jinping's Guangdong innovation, fabulous success. Hu Yabang's attempted innovation, it was kneecapped in 1987. Another innovation is this guy on the right, is Gu Zhongshan. His innovation is he's institutionalised, perhaps like nobody else, except for perhaps the railway minister, Liu Zhuzhun. Another innovation of what we like to call Maiguan, the buying and selling of positions. And so if this is going to be a market economy, then why don't you just throw it all on the table? How much does it cost to become the deputy leader of the director of the logistics department of the People's Liberation Army, an organisation that has a budget, I don't know how big, but it's very, very large. He used to be a leader, a Heishuhui kind of organiser in northern Hebei, and somehow from there he entered the PLA, bought his way all the way up to the top, has got some very, very, very big name patrons, including one person who I won't name, but is the vice chair of the Central Military Commission. And he looked like he's going to get away with it. A couple of times Hu Jintao ordered discipline and investigation against Gu Zhongshan. It was stopped by his own political department. This is a People's Liberation Army that's very good at buying and selling positions, not very good at anything else, including fighting wars. That's one of the other innovations. It's not yet over. We don't know whether this is going to succeed or fail in China. I suspect a lot hinges on it failing. Interestingly, the only guy that could, in this particular moment in time, in the way the structure of powers work, the only guy that could stop Gu Zhongshan was a guy who's the highest born princeling in the government elite, and that's Liu Shaoqi's son Liu Yuan. So he drew on all of his political capital, and as you can imagine, it's pretty considerable. And Gu Zhenshan, when Liu Yuan confronted him in December last year, Gu Zhenshan said, "Shall we start the conversation at 30 million yuan?" But Liu Yuan had other ideas and brought him down. So Gu Zhenshan is going through the investigation process. It doesn't look like his patrons up the tree are going to be touched, but at least it was one sort of fight back against the practice of buying and selling positions in the People's Liberation Army. So that's Chinese government innovation number 3, seemingly perfected by this guy and also Liu Zhejun, the railway minister, and many, many others. It definitely goes up to the Central Committee level. Beyond that, you don't really know, but business and politics are absolutely intertwined at the moment. Government innovation number 4, Chongqing. This is I like to call it the dynastic model. So this guy Xi Jinping, as you know, some of these guys that I've just talked about before, 3 kind of heroes in their own way, and not necessarily full heroes, but they've done some amazing things. Xi Jinping, his father of the Guangdong model. Xi Jinping also goes around to the house of Huyabang every year, respects the family hugely, partly for rehabilitating his own father. So indebted to the family of Huyabang. Has been very close to General Liu Yuan, the son of Liu Shaoqi, all of his adult life. They both went down to the countryside to start their careers in provincial government in the early 80s. Another person that he's been very close to of late, and I suspect this is a kind of a relationship of convenience, of political convenience to some extent, was Bo Xilai. This is when he went down to Chongqing in late 2010, and nobody's ever blown sunshine up a local government leader like Xi Jinping did to Bo Xilai at that moment. Something changed since then. Now, in some ways, this is really the thing that's completely catalysed, blown everything apart in Chinese politics. And just like the purge of Huyabang was the beginning of the end of political reform in China and the beginning of a new path, if not for Huyabang, perhaps it couldn't have been a Tiananmen. Perhaps things wouldn't have crystallised into the political path that China's trodden over the last 20 years. And also, I don't think we can underestimate the possible implications of not just the end of Bo Xilai, but the absolutely obliteration, really. The accusations, which will no doubt translate into criminal charges soon. Basically, Bo Xilai has been accused of and therefore will be guilty of just about everything you can think of. That also provides an opportunity, it's not guaranteed, but at least a possibility that the system can redefine itself in opposition to what Bo Xilai is found or said to have stood for. So what does Bo stand for? I think it's a really interesting question. Just when you thought things couldn't get more extraordinary, every week there's a new kind of revelation about what was going on in Chongqing. One of the patterns here is just very hard to escape, that this dynastic thing in China is, it's never gone away. And Bo Yibo's own mother sacrificed Bo Yibo's younger baby brother because the family didn't have enough food to eat, so that Bo Yibo could be the chosen son. Bo Yibo did that in many ways for Bo Xilai, did everything he could to pave Bo Xilai's political path, particularly through his relationship with Jiang Zemin. Bo Xilai has done everything he can for Bo Guagua, including excommunicate his firstborn son, Li Wangzhi, which he may or may not regret, depending on what we find out about some of the background shenanigans over the last 6 months. And Bo Guagua, now he's the prince in exile. He's lost his parents, just like Bo Xilai lost his mother in the Cultural Revolution. These kind of haunting dynastic echoes that are going through the family. Who's to say that Bo Guagua won't be somebody back in China in 15, 20 years? I wouldn't bet against him. Anything can happen. But this is a system that has never, in some ways the face has changed, but the kind of the echoes, the system, the kind of the dynastic rhythms of politics remain the same. And the princeling thing in China is a huge question at the moment. We don't yet know how the Boursilai implosion has challenged the sense of princeling entitlement in China. Perhaps it will, perhaps it won't. We'll get at least a preliminary indicator when they line up for the Politburo Standing Committee on November 15, and more of an indicator when we see some of the new faces on the Central Military Commission over the next year or two. But there are other things that Boursilai stood for too. It was a real it was a family kingdom. The idea was that the police force was, everybody who mattered in Chongqing by 2010, 2011 were not that much different from eunuchs in the imperial court in the Forbidden City a few years ago. They were just family functionaries, beginning and the end. Wang Lijun was his kind of machine for purging the bureaucracy. The first thing that Wang Lijun did was put in jail his predecessor as police chief. Anybody who, you didn't have to be in opposition, anybody who was not absolutely on side the Boer family project, they found themselves in jail for various things. Torture was torture's a problem all over the country, but torture was absolutely out of control in Chongqing. So this just provides an opportunity, and things are so complicated, who knows what's actually going to happen, to reflect on how some things haven't changed, how some things need to be changed in Chinese government innovation. And if you need, and I think the starting point for thinking about the possibilities of China's immediate governing future is really the story of Boursilai. And lo and behold, you can read all about it in a week and a half if you go on Amazon. Is that my 10 or 12 minutes? Now, is that a heckle from the back of the room? Because that's what my daughter said. She said, "It's a little bit plain, isn't it?" And she said, "I think it needs more penguins." So, give or take a couple of penguins, that's about it. Plenty more things I will talk about, but I might hand over to David.